So we wanted to mark an anniversary which is really one of the best in Irish sport in many respects. It's 20 years ago this month since Marcus O'Sullivan, now as you all know I'm sure based at Vilanova, ran his 100th sub 4 minute mile. And if you suspect that's a big achievement, you're right. Only three men in history have managed to do so. And I'm delighted to say Marcus joins us from his office now. You're very welcome. Thanks a million for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're getting snow here. How is all in Vilanova?
We have a nice sunny day. I heard the snow was coming to Ireland, so I wasn't sure how many inches you were going to get. I'm curious.
Well, a few apparently, although already the bread has been sold out in shops and there's widespread panic, but there's no sign of the snow yet, but we're taking it in our stride.
Good stuff.
So 100 sub 4 minute miles is clearly an unbelievable achievement. Where does that rank in your many achievements? Is it something you're very, very proud of?
I'm extremely proud of it, mainly because it took 15 years to accomplish. From 1983, which was my first one when I was a junior in college, all the way to 1998, which took essentially 15 years. And it wasn't something that was planned, but evolved over time. And I think it has more of a representation of who I was as an athlete. I kind of don't want to diminish it in any way, but like a plugger who just kept on going to work every day. And essentially that's why it means so much to me. So
it's almost a testament to lifestyle and graft over outrageous talent. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah. In a roundabout way, that's what I'm trying to say. I think it has more of a representation of who I was as a person, and I'm very, very proud of it, to be honest. Probably more than anything.
When you say it evolved, Marcus, at what point did you think to yourself, I'm not a million miles off 100 sub 4 minute miles here?
It actually happened at a kind of a critical time in my athletic career. I was maybe about 32 years old at the time, and I was getting ready to retire. And unbeknownst to myself, I ended up rediscovering myself through one afternoon, a rainy day. I always kept diaries. Donny Walsh, the good Corkman coach that I had before I ever went to Vilanova, always made me keep a diary. And I went and counted the sub 4 minute miles, and I had accumulated at that time about 60. And I was about to retire, and something came over me where I started to go through this process of like, oh, I wonder how long it would take me to reach 100. It would be something of an achievement. And at a critical time where I thought I was going to retire, I ended up staying in the sport for about another 5 or 6 years. And it took me that much time to choreograph it and to kind of lay it all out. And it actually turned out to be probably one of the most important 6 years of my life, because I learned a lot about coaching. I learned a lot about training. I learned a lot about rediscovering oneself and redesigning your goals and your ambitions and changing on the fly and making something more worthwhile doing, where you're thinking you're just about to finish, and all of a sudden you've got a new goal ahead of you.
Yeah, I can imagine, because rediscovery of oneself is, unfortunately for athletes in particular, a very necessary endeavour.
It is, and it's very hard to find. You do it through changing events, you do it through changing sport even. And for me, I did it through a kind of a path that was accomplishable, not outrageous. It was a fair assessment to say if I could knock out 8 or 9 a year for the next 5 years, it would carry me to 100. The challenge for me was finding the miles, because at that time we were moving to metric. There was a lot more 1,500 meter races, which are not included in these sub fours. And so therefore, I remember one particular time, Kim McDonald, who was my agent at the time, saying that I've got a mile in Hong Kong. Do you want to go? And so it was a 16-hour non-stop flight from San Francisco. I got off the plane. I rested one day, knocked out the sub 4 minute mile, and then flew back home.
Wow.
So they weren't easy to find back then, and the challenge became geographically trying to find them that were within reasonable.
Okay, so you couldn't just set up a quick 4 minute mile situation as some kind of race in the local park down the road. It didn't work like that, clearly.
No, it didn't. It didn't. And they're much harder to orchestrate than one would think.
Right.
And then you have to have the authenticity behind it in terms of its documentation, essentially.
Because they can be contested, and I know you've done over 100 maybe, because there's always the fear something may be contested for one reason or another. And so that's the logistical side of things, which actually is not to be underestimated based on what you're saying there. What about physically? Is that 5, 6, 7 years where you're racking up those 8 or 9 sub 4 minute miles to reach 100? Is that a physically demanding period?
You know what, it was interesting because in tandem with rediscovering myself in terms of goals and redirecting where I was going, I got very interested in the physiology of training. I got into heart rate. I got into what I would call sensible training. And part of the reason why I was about to retire at 32, I felt tired, I felt beat up. I felt like it'd been a hard 10 years, 9 or 10 years. And by opening up this area of, again, maybe part of rediscovering myself as an athlete, but physiologically just looking at things a little bit differently, maybe having some more easier days, maybe training with more specificity as to what I'm trying to accomplish with the training. I think through that process, it was an enjoyable educational 5 years towards the end. But what it did was it set the foundation and the environment for me to be able to sustain the effort. So when I retired, I was actually not physically beat up. I was kind of more mentally tired, and it was more once I let go at that point, and it was more of an emotional ending than it was a physical.
It's not like the previous decade or so or plus was not a very fruitful one. I mean, 4 Olympic Games, 3 goals at the World Indoors, and many other records and accolades besides. So were you just flogging yourself for your 20s? Was it all pain for the game? Was that kind of the attitude? I have to hurt myself?
No. It was just more of a calculation as to where we were going to go. Kim McDonald at the time was very accommodating. He knew it was something big for me, and with the help of him, he had his ear to the information that was needed to actually, hey, there's a mile here, there's a mile here. Why don't we do these 2, and it'll lay up for something else? So he was very accommodating, which was proved fruitful in that regard. And he kind of knew and understood that it was important to me, and I think he worked with me through the process, which helped.
In many respects, your career is a very unlikely one. I mean, I was just reading today, I hadn't fully realised that when you came out of secondary school, you were doing 425 miles, which didn't exactly grab the attention of Vilanova or anybody in the States. I mean, you weren't necessarily destined for greatness as a 16, 17-year-old, it seems.
That would be fair. But I wasn't bound for college, and I certainly wasn't bound for a sub 4 minute mile. And I ended up taking a job in Kinsale, the seaport town of Kinsale, where I worked as a sailmaker. And in the evening times when I got home, I would end up, I had connected by this time with Donny Walsh, a Villanovan, a Cork coach, an Olympian. And Donny took me under his wing for that maybe year. And he took me from that 425 to like 405, 406 in the mile.
And what was your lifestyle across that year?
The lifestyle was pretty hectic. It was, 7, 8 o'clock, you're on the bus to Kinsale, which was an hour away. You'd work for the day. You'd get on the bus and drive home, and you get home by about 5 o'clock. Now, keep in mind, I'm 17-ish, 18 years old at the time. You're exhausted from a day's work. First time you're really kind of, committed to something. I'd actually have my dinner, go to bed, get up about 7 o'clock in the evening time, and then head off to the club and train until about 10 o'clock at night, come back home and have a cup of tea, some toast, and go to bed and do it all over again the next day. And it was one of those temporary commitments that I had made where I was going to give it a shot, I was going to give it everything I had. If it worked, it worked. And if it didn't, I was committed also then to move on with my life and do something other than running. But fortunately for me, I was very small for my age. And I started to grow and develop in that year after secondary school, and it actually it gave me the physical strength to be able to catch up a little bit in that 1 year. So I was kind of like blessed that I had stayed on for another year in the sport and not had just completely capitulated and moved on.
I'm sure, yeah. Were your ambitions at 15, 16, 17 to run in an Olympic Games, to run seriously? Was that why you were putting yourself through what frankly sounds like a very grim year?
Yeah. You know what? When we were kids, my dad would take us on afternoon walks and on Sundays, and we'd head out the country roads and we'd be there for, all day, literally. We it was a 7 or 8 year old, you're walking 10 miles. That's a lot of walking. I think it was just to get us out of the house and give my mom a rest, And I remember one particular afternoon, we were heading out up towards the Cork airport. And I naively just asked my dad, do you think I could make the Olympic team? Now, keep in mind, I wasn't involved in any sport. We weren't really a sporting family.
Right.
And he entertained me and kind of, I remember it like it was yesterday. And he said, you know what, hang on a sec here now. Let me look at this. And he was saying, well, 76, forget about 76. He said 80, they've just named Moscow for the 1980 Olympics. And I think you're going to be too young for that. But let's keep an eye on 84. 84 seems like a good year, and that might be the year that you might make the team. Now, you have to understand, I wasn't involved in any sport or anything like that. So, the way a parent would have a kind of an incidental conversation to a child, but he had planted the seed in me that I couldn't get out of my head. It was just this thing I was preoccupied, but we never ever discussed it again. We never went back and talked about it again. And I went to the local running club and went down to Leevale and went out for the first night. I think I was about 8 years old at the time, and I was very, very small for my age, so I get put in with all the girls to do wind sprints and sprints, and by the end of the evening, I think I was beaten by every girl in every sprint, and decided that night I was going to quit the sport and go home. So I'm walking home one night, one and done, one night walking home. And I'm beside myself, and I said, well, that's the end of that then, And so it was later in primary school, they were looking for volunteers for the cross-country team. And I remember putting my hand up and just sit in the back of the class, and I said, maybe I'll give this a go, And one of the brothers kind of said, no, Mr. O'Sullivan, you're a very small young man, and you may not be you may not be tough enough and strong enough to be able to go out and run cross-country. So I didn't go out. I actually sat down a little bit embarrassed that I was trying to volunteer for something. I couldn't even get taken for the volunteer group. So it was not until we went into secondary school at Coláiste and we had a man by the name of Bernard Martin. You always remember these names. And he came around and he said, unless you have a broken foot or you have a doctor's note, I want everyone out for cross-country tomorrow. And so we were all forced out. He was never allowed to do it again. I think there were so many complaints about it, but he had about 120 students, first-year students, out running around a football field. And you're in that state of oxygen debt where you have no more to give. And I'm in my bare feet and I'm running around the field, 4 or 5 times, and somebody grabbed me by the shoulder and said, "Number 4, you're on the team." And that's essentially my introduction formally. After 3 times, I got into the sport, and we had a prosperous 5 years. But keep in mind, I was never even the best in my secondary school, and so I was always going to be behind somebody. I was always going to get out-kicked by somebody. So I went through that process naively, thinking that one day I'd still make the Olympic Games. But it didn't seem like it was going to happen by the end of high school.
Yeah. Were you the hardest working guy?
I don't know if I was the hardest working guy, but I certainly think running helped me in terms of it was an escape from many things. I wanted to be running. It gave me an opportunity to be alone in my own mind, maybe, so maybe there was a lot more deeperness there than I give credit to as a kid growing up. And there were tough years back in the 80s. Economically, it was a challenging time. Sure. in the late 70s, the 70s and into the 80s. And so it was one of those things where I just thoroughly enjoyed the people I was with when I was out running. And I also enjoyed the opportunities when I got to run by myself.
Okay.
And so there was maybe a lot more to it than just athleticism, if you will.
Yeah. That whole Greg Louganis sport is meditation and motion line may be applicable.
Very much so. Yeah, and I still do it today. I love to go out to jog. I don't go out to jog to necessarily stay fit as much as I do for just a refreshment, if you will, for a mental break from everything, and to go over things in my mind that you want to do for the next day at work or what have you. You know.
I saw you say, I think it was to Carl Dennehy in the Irish Examiner, of that period when you're just out of school and you're still clinging on to these childhood ambitions. And I mean, you've talked about your lifestyle, which sounded very tough. You said those mundane portions of life, staying focused on the things you have to do. I was good at that. I enjoyed boredom.
Yeah, you know, I must have said that in jest, and when I read it, I normally don't read this stuff, but somebody said his piece was so good and well written that I needed to read it, so that and it was a great piece, and it was a great summation, because when I read it, I said I do enjoy the mundane things, I do enjoy the repetition of things. I actually revel in building. I call it the building bricks of training, and I think maybe in my diary, it's like a ship pulling off a dock, and as you're pulling off, the journey is long and there's a long way to go, but every day you write into your journal as to what you're doing, and then a page turns and it's a week, and then a second page turns and 4 pages turn and it's a month. And you know, the 52 weeks of the year start turning, and just to sit and look at the diary and see the work that you've done and the accomplishments that you've done through training now, not accomplishments in actually racing. I enjoyed that building, and I think that had more of a mental connection than a physical connection, and it gave me strength in terms of deserving something. So if you were on the line, you knew you had done the work, and I think that is an attribute for athletes, that they have to have that. They have to have that willingness to make the boredom their central part of the day. And the exciting moments are the things that the public sees. If you're out in a race, or you're out in an interview, or you're out, like, people think that that's your life complete, and it's not. That's actually one small 2 or 3% of your work day. Most of it is the rudimentary things of what you candidly said was boredom.
Yeah. You went to Vilanova at 19, spent 4 years there. You mentioned at the outset, when we're discussing your over 100 sub 4 minute miles, that you managed your first one in 1983. Was that a hard fought moment? Is that a huge deal to break a 4 minute mile in 1983? Or at that stage was it, done, on to the next thing?
You know, it was a huge moment, because back then Vilanova has, I think collectively we could have as many as more than 500 sub 4 minute miles from all our alumni together. Like, that would be my 100, Eamon, Ron Delaney, the likes of that.
Yeah.
But back then the number, I think, if I recollect, the number was about 18 people at that time that had broken sub 4 from Vilanova, and I wanted to be a member of that group. We actually had a list in our program which listed everyone, and it was something special to me. Today we have 40 members that have broken 4, and I've coached 14 or 15 of them since being here. And it was very, very special. And I remember being brought down to a particular race, and the attempt was going to be at this particular track, and it was the old Tin Can Arena at the University of North Carolina. And when I got done, my head was spinning. I went right to the bathroom. I threw up in the bathroom. So my memory of it is cloudy, and I felt ill.
Wow.
After it was done. But at the same time, going home, you're thinking that might be the only one you might ever do in your life, and you're happy to have been a part of it.
I'm sure. It's almost, well, they can't take that away from me. No matter what happens, I've done that. I can put that. I mean, I didn't realise it was as few as 18 potentially at Vilanova when you did it. But I guess it's not a million years at that stage since when Roger Bannister was trying to do it. People thought you would combust. The human body would literally combust if it went under 4 minutes. We're not designed to do this. Yes, and once Roger Bannister had broken it, I don't know what the numbers are, but within the next 18 months after that, quite a significant number. I think we're into the 30s, actually. It's as high as the 30s. I mean, it just shows the power of the mind as much as anything. Total power of the mind and the mind's influence on others.
But at the same time, it was very much it was very much still an exclusive club into the 70s and the 80s. There's a lot more doing it today, and I think a lot of it has to do with the technical side of coaching has gotten better. It's improved. It's more sophisticated, and so you'll get a lot more kids today actually running on performance.
And when you say the technical side of coaching is improved, that's very interesting. Do you mean just from a very bog standard S&C point of view, or actually in how people run the science of movement?
No, actually in probably neither. When you say S&C, I'm assuming you're meaning strength and conditioning. Yeah. That obviously has a component to it, but it is more the understanding of the aerobic system and the anaerobic system, and the quantities of work that you do in each, and identifying each athlete, understanding what's the driver behind it. So, you'll get an athlete that primarily runs 5K, 10K, moving down to the mile, and on one particular evening they'll break 4 minutes. But it's really driven from the aerobic system. It's a very powerful aerobic system that the person has, and they're going to do it. You'll get the miler, the pure miler, who's a half miler who doesn't run the 10K or the 5K, and they're going to do it on more of a combination of the aerobic and the anaerobic system.
Okay.
And so therefore identifying the athletes and then training the specificity of what their strengths are, and being able to use very specific science in terms of lactates, heart rate, and that kind of stuff to be able to identify where the crossover is. So therefore you're never training somebody in an area that you're not meant to be in, because you have the data to come back and actually pull it together to say, all right, we need to slow this down here a little bit because we want to develop more in your aerobic system, or we need to pick it up here because we want to tap into the anaerobic system. And I think that specificity in terms of training has allowed a lot more coaches to roughly figure out the drivers in terms of the driving forces, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic or the combination of both, that makes it happen.
Wow, it's fascinating stuff, yeah. And just you mentioned the mind as well and how it's all powerful. Can you give us an insight into that, what your mind is doing when you're competing, the wrestle that's going on, I presume in some respects with your mind, and it's just the psychology of suffering, which I suppose is such a huge component of any kind of distance running.
Yeah. Sometimes you take it for granted. When you're an athlete, particularly when you're a professional athlete, you think everyone thinks the same way you do. Only when I got into coaching, it was a rude awakening because I started to realize, even in young athletes, that not everyone was thinking the same way you were thinking. And just a few cases of when I finally did my 101 sub 4 minute mile. I'd gone down to Australia. I just wrapped it up with 101 just in case I needed one extra if anything was contended. And that's the way I was thinking. And as I flew home, I knew I was retiring. I mean, that was it. And I did not realize until shortly after that once I had let go mentally, once I had given myself the okay to retire, I realized I could never do the things that I was just recently doing physically a month or so ago again. And that was my first real, even though it was after I retired, that was the first real time I realized the power of the mind had such a big factor in what I was doing. Because once I had decided that mentally I was no longer going to do this, it was amazing that I physically understood I could never do it physically without the mind's preparation.
And what did letting go feel like? I presume we're talking about more than when the dessert cart comes by, you allow yourself to have a little bit of ice cream. Like, is it a constant? Is it something that you would notice throughout your entire day, that you have let go of something that you used to have? Is it just about discipline, or is it about something else, do you think?
No, it was something else. It wasn't about the discipline. You can be disciplined all you want. Right. It was the engagement. It was like something that was engaged, like a mechanism that was engaged, like the clutch in a car. Where it was totally engaged. It was driving everything, and all of a sudden you declutched it, and you knew you were no longer spinning. You were no longer turning the mental directives that were guiding everything.
Is the obsession stopped, I suppose?
The obsession, the mental isolation, the just everything down to what you were saying about what you're eating.
Yeah.
They were kind of more incidental things. They were things that you've already kind of like they were something that was part of the process.
And what do you mean by the mental isolation, Marcus?
You're watching a movie with your wife. You're sitting, you're watching it. You're both engaged in the movie. It's 10 o'clock. There's 20 minutes left to the climax of the movie, and you get up and you leave and you say, "All right, I'm going to bed." Now your wife is sitting there. You have to be kidding. I mean, 20 minutes left. You go to bed. You get into bed. About 5 minutes later, she'll come up and slam the door because she's after turning the movie off, and she's getting into bed. And she goes, I just don't understand you. I just don't get it, you know. And I said, well, we can have a cup of tea in the morning. We'll watch the rest of the movie. And so you have this. I'm just giving you a little funny
Sure,
story.
no, it's actually very illustrative. It explains a lot.
That actually did happen, but a lot. But you know, so what you end up finding it. I don't know if mental isolation is the right word, but it's definitely mental detachment. Some people might call it self-centeredness in athletes. Everything revolves around what they want to do when they want to do it, and athletes can be very what I would consider generous with their time. They can be very engaged in the community of giving.
Yeah.
But it's on their time.
And do you miss that now? So that let's for the purpose of this discussion call it mental isolation. In a grim sort of way, was there something enjoyable about being in that space, or are you kind of happy to be rid of it now?
No, because I think you're never rid of it. I think I've gotten worse with coaching. And so I now, as time has moved on, I think it's just the way you're genetically built.
Okay.
And you have a predisposition to be able to engage into something else once you've discovered what that something else is. So you come back and you clutch again, you re-engage, and all of a sudden, I think when I first got into coaching, I remember my wife, we have a good marriage, actually. We've been married now for well over 30 years, so I'm not complaining here. But I remember her once.
There are good days too.
There are, yeah. But I remember her one time, Mary said to me, she said, when you were running, you were physically away. And when you were physically away, I knew you were engaged in what you were doing. But now that you're home, you're physically home, but I never seem to have you engaged mentally. And I think what I was doing, I was so wrapped up in the coaching aspects of things, getting things right for athletes, trying to go over workouts in my head constantly. And so you have this, I want to say it's almost dysfunctional way of trying to create balance. So recognizing it is first and foremost, and then trying to create a balance in your life whereby you let go periodically. You let it go for a few days, and you go away and you do something else, and you come back to it again. But I think it might be a genetic predisposition. Or
do you think so? Really? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I suspect you're a work in progress on the whole letting things go.
I am.
Mary might have a different tale to tell. Let's not. Marcus here has got it all.
She should be on the show with.
Yeah. Mary, Marcus says he's got things balanced. Discuss. You became head coach of Vilanova in 1998. So I mean, what a prestigious, amazing thing. And you know, after 4 Olympic Games, and you're a 3-time indoor world champion, and you've 100 plus sub 4 minute miles, it's a remarkable career for any athlete, not just an Irish athlete. And then Vilanova is this amazing thing. Every Olympic Games since 1948 has had a Vilanova athlete there. It is, you know, it is just a word itself for prestige. So you get that in 1998. You would think on the face of it, wow, what an amazing thing. And I read, I think it was in that Irish Examiner piece as well, you're talking about the guts of 3 years hating the job, or certainly the first year, you say, was the most depressing I've ever had. That's very interesting.
It is, and I've kind of gone over it a few times in my head to see why, and going back to that, we're talking about mental isolation, or I kind of transferred that to maybe self-centeredness, as athletes can be so self-centered at times. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I was one of them, so sure. I mean it in a good way. And coaching, I didn't realize was so selfless. And I think once I got into coaching, I actually was miserable. I was, and I don't hesitate to say it, I thought I had made a huge mistake in terms of what direction I was going in life. I actually had excelled academically. I think I was just a slow starter out of the gates. Once I got to Vilanova, I had a degree in accounting. I'd gone back to do my MBA. I'd finished my chartered exam accounting. I was in the middle of my CFA, Certified Financial Analyst exams, and this coaching job came up, and it wasn't truly the direction I felt destined to do, and I felt kind of obligated. It's your alma mater. You need to kind of give it back. Maybe we'll give it a shot and we'll see. And the people that I was interviewing with all were excited about me doing the coaching, not doing the business stuff. And they were all saying, give it a go, give it a go. And after that first year, the only silver lining in it is that I never regretted doing it, because I finally realized what my coaches had done for me athletically. I didn't realize how important the support was that I had gotten from my coaches throughout the years, and I fully understood the fact that I was a self-centered person trying to move into a seated position of selflessness, if you will, being a coach, and it was too much of a swing for me. It was too much. It was really such a radical 180 turnaround. And I like to give the story of, I wasn't interested in making kids better athletically. It just didn't have that appeal to me. We had won a national championship that particular year in cross country, and it didn't do it for me at that particular time. But then there was one of the kids' parents had passed away. We had all gotten into our cars on a snowy evening, and we were driving to the funeral. And as we were sitting in the pews and the funeral was taking place, I saw obviously the sad sorrow situation. A young boy in college losing his mother. I think she died of cancer. And I walked out of the church that night and I said, I could get into this. I could get into being in a place to help people. And I think slowly that was a turnaround. That was more something that I started to think of it as, this coaching is more of a vocation to help people as much as you possibly can, within the confines of them being willing to be helped. And I took a whole new look at it, and I started to look at it differently. And I think my greatest pleasure now is to see kids that have come through the program and they've gone on to medical school, or they've gone on to PhD programs. I recently got a note from a kid who I kicked off the team years back. And he writes me a nice note. He said, I wish I had understood what you were trying to teach me at the time. He had transferred to a different school, and underneath he had it signed as he was an attorney with a PhD, and he obviously did very well for himself. And I wrote back to him and I said, I always knew you were going to be okay. Your father never took it personal. He understood we were trying to help you grow as an individual. I mean, he was literally he was a right pain. I had to get rid of him. Yeah. He goes to a different school. He ends up flourishing. He ends up writing me a note back, basically saying, I appreciate your effort, and I knew I wasn't ready to receive your coaching at the time. And I wrote back saying, your dad was a solid man, and I knew the apple didn't fall too far from the tree, and I knew you were going to be fine. And just this encounter 15 years after something like this happens was just a great note to get from somebody that it wasn't working for me here, for him at that time. So the athlete has to be willing to receive the information you're trying to impart on them, to help them and guide them as well too. I'm sure. And again, it's funny we're talking about the anniversary of your 100 sub 4 minute mile. I guess it's also the anniversary 20 years at Vilanova, which is an amazing thing. Do the vast majority of young people that you encounter go on to make their living away from athletics? Is that is that kind of the reality here, or absolutely. Yeah, that's even at Villanova. Yeah, and even at Villanova. Okay. I mean, a lot of people take it for granted that they kind of say that if you've got the talent, you're automatically going to get there, and it's such a fallacy. It's not true at all. Because I was going to ask you about that actually, where I guess kicked off, Malcolm Gladwell popularised 10,000 hours, and to be fair to him, that was kind of botched a little bit. I don't think he was necessarily talking about sport, and then you've got the talent code and various different
takes on what it takes to succeed. And I was going to ask you, you're at that elite level and that intersection of talent and just genetics, which are superior. And I don't know what you're seeing. I mean, I know it's not a scientific analysis you can give me necessarily, but you swirl unbelievable genetics, maybe superior genetics, with other people who are just harder workers. I don't know who comes out on top necessarily.
Yeah, and I think, to refer to Malcolm Gladwell's book, I think he made it was an inference, but he made an assumption there that you had talent to begin, a certain amount. I don't think he meant anybody can go out there and do 10,000 hours and all of a sudden they're going to be a scratch golfer.
It's definitely been butchered so much, yeah.
It has, and I think his intentions were that, look, with the talent in whatever you're doing, and you had to have a modest or a certain amount of talent, you still had to put the time in there.
Yeah.
And once you get into books like The Talent Code and you start talking about environment, what kind of environment do you grow up in? Are you exposed to an environment where that's what they do? It's for me, I think, coming through Coláiste de Christ, coming through Lee Vale, I was swarmed with this amount of athleticism back then, that my willingness to do the work over a long period of time proved, not necessarily even athletically, but academically, I think I started to grow more. And I always say that sometimes kids, you don't have to be brilliant in secondary school. You don't have to be brilliant. Sometimes your maturity or your heightened abilities don't come until later on, and staying with it and having the patience to stay with it and having the coaches or the parents or the teachers to stay with you on it can prove tremendous, a bountiful kind of successful career.
I presume you are occasionally seeing people who come to you and are genetically gifted and don't work as hard as people around them and yet beat them.
Yes.
There's just a grim, this is life. Some people get luckier than others in the genetic pool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are, and you're happy to have them on your team, of course.
Sure. Yeah. But you want to give them a kick up the ass.
Yeah. And then you're so proud of kids that work hard, and they have modest talent, but they're determined. And that determination is what we would call grit. It starts to surface, and when they start to do something special, it gives everyone hope. And it gives the average man or average woman hope, in that if they can do it, then I can do it.
Are you going to be at Vilanova for the next 20 years, or what's the plan?
I'm not going to be there for 20 years now, but I don't intend doing. I love what I'm doing. I complain sometimes about what I'm doing, but I truly love what I'm doing. And my coach was the famed Jumbo Elliott, and I don't pretend to be walking in his shoes. I don't pretend to try and do the magnificent things that he did with me, and he died my freshman year, but with me and athletes that have come before him all the way back to Ron Delaney. But I think I've put my own spin on the program and tried to make it a better place than I possibly could by the time I leave, to be able to hand it off to some other coaches that come after me.
And do you know what you're going to do ultimately?
Ultimately, I suppose I have to retire at some point. But I don't like to look at. I like to look at it like I'm going to transition into something else. I'm not sure what that is going to be. I don't see myself not working. I enjoy work because maybe it's the work that I do that I enjoy it. So I'm not quite sure.
Because we could do with someone to organise distance running or rejuvenate it over here. I'm sure people have mentioned that to you several times.
Yeah, but I think it takes its course. I'd like to think I'm going to spend more time in Ireland when I'm finished with my job at Vilanova. But I think there's some magnificent coaches there. My own coach, Donny Walsh, is still coaching at a very high level, at an Olympic status level in terms of getting athletes to the Olympic Games. And I think for such a small country, we could be better synergistically combined. We seem to always struggle with that in many ways, and people have tried over the years, and not to be critical or anything, because that's not my intention.
Sure.
But it's more that you definitely need, in my mind, and I've said this, you've got to have one guy at the head, and the coaches are all working with him through the process of all doing what they think collectively they need to be doing. And I think that's how you bring a team together. That's how you bring a cross-country team together primarily. And it's all done through education. It's all done through, and I think people are trying, and I think there are people out there that are trying, but it's difficult at times, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, one last question, and you've been very good with your time. It's kind of outrageous, really, that we would have an Irish athlete on who's 4 indoor world golds and 3 and 4 Olympic Games, and they haven't really even featured very much in this interview, which is kind of testament to what an interesting career you've had. Those 3 goals and the 4 Olympic Games, I mean, 3 goals is remarkable. Is there a regret there, or is there some technical reason why that may not have been as easily translated into Olympic Games? I mean, I'm asking this from a position of ignorance at that time.
No. It's a very fair question. It's a question that I when I think my flourishing year was supposedly should have been 88. And so I couldn't get it right that year. I'd run 350 indoors, marginally missing the world, Eamon Coughlin's world record at the time. Yeah. And I just, for some reason, couldn't replicate it. And maybe I didn't know enough physiologically at the time to be able to do it. But when I got to Seoul, I knew I wasn't on. I was struggling to break 4 minutes in August.
And you'd done 350 earlier that year.
Yeah, indoors. And in hindsight, and I still made the final, still finished 8 in what I would consider a very, very, very average build-up and preparedness to the Olympics. And I think that was my window. I think, few were chosen. And when you get that opportunity, it's a combination of having the skill set, talent-wise, the preparedness in terms of the devotion to it, and the timing. Peter Rono won that year. Peter and I are good friends, and I don't think Peter won a race before or won a race after, but he won the right one. And I always nostalgically look back, and I would catch him and I would say, "But Peter, you won the right one."
Does that nag at you?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times,
daily, weekly?
No, not on a daily basis. But it does nag at me at times where I think I had the willpower, I think I had the drive, I think I had a lot of things on board with me. But sometimes you need a bit of luck as well too to go your way. And I'm not saying I wasn't unlucky. I was lucky in a lot of other aspects.
Sure.
And keep in mind, a lot of people think you win all your races. I mean, if I had to go back and look at the amount of races I won, I would say maybe 20%. You try to win some of the main ones, and you give this historical, nostalgic look back on it that you won a lot. But the reality of it is, you lose more than you win. And being able to accept failure as part of the process and to embrace it as part of how do I move on from it.
Yeah.
And Seoul was one of those major failures for me, whereby I just decided that I needed to move on, and again and find other avenues of exploration. Whether it be, I was fortunate enough to have indoors as being one of those thrilling periods of my athletic career where I just flourished for some reason, and I enjoyed it. Something to do in the winter maybe, or what have you, but whatever. But I'm very proud of the fact that I was good at something.
Wow, more than good. I mean, 3 indoor world goals, which get underway very shortly, and Wanamaker miles as well. Hey, actually my last question, but seeing as 1988 has come up, like in my memory, I mean, I was only very young at the time, so I don't remember it, but 1988 for me is almost a byword for drugs and the dirtiest race, the 100 metres, so infamous and everything. Was that swirling around your time? Were you very aware of that, or is it only in hindsight you realised, or what was going on in your particular event? And I'm not casting aspersions on anybody, not least your friend who you mentioned.
Yeah, it actually you're referring to the 100 meters in 88 South Korea. Yeah, I mean, I think everyone in the world was shocked, including us, but we were shocked for different reasons. In the village, I always remember we knew the public was shocked outside, ghastly. How could this be happening? we were shocked inside that somebody actually had the courage to expose it.
Yeah.
So our shock was different. We were all collectively shocked, but for different reasons. And it was an interesting observation to have made that we were as shocked as the outsiders looking in. And our shock was just totally different, that we were encouraged by the fact that somebody had stood up and, obviously released the information that it was like a dam breaking and there was no going back after this point. And I think that was the reality of it at that time.
Yeah, okay. We're completely out of time. We've gone over time, but it's been fascinating. And again, congratulations. The anniversary of a really amazing achievement. You and two others have run 100 plus sub 4 minute miles. So congratulations on that. Thanks so much for coming on, Marcus. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe.
Hey, hope you enjoyed that latest offering from Off the Ball. If you want to subscribe, and you should, check out just up here. All our latest stuff is just down here. Generally, knock yourself out.